for coming. This is kind of some of the most badass organizers in Chicago that have come to hear Ruthie Gilmore. Welcome to Chicago, Ruthie.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. We are loving it. So we're gonna, we did talk about some questions, but we also want to share some, have some conversation with the audience and give you an opportunity to ask some questions later, succinct ones, so whittling them down, she writes long quote. You're so quotable, all over the place, so quotable. So that inspires people to ask long questions, but anyway.
It's my fault.
We want to start off kind of where Dana started us off, which, is in the fierce urgency of now. We are trying to make sense of a hell of a mess. It's scary, it's infuriating, it's confusing, and there's a lot of labels and names wrapped around it. So I wanted to have you start us off, wrestling with and thinking out loud with us about the moment we're in. How do we best understand it? How do we best name it? And of course, before we stop talking tonight, how do we best confront and resist it?
Is that all?
Well, and that's part one, now part two.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Barbara, and thank you all for coming out this evening. Thank you, Haymarket, for having us. And I already thanked Dana, but I'll thank Dana again for being such a great comrade, and John McDonald for inviting me to participate in this particular way. So the best way I can kind of summarize, using some big words but not opaque words, the condition we're in is that we are and have long experienced the global malallocation of symbolic and conceptual and material resources. All right? Now, most of that sentence isn't mine. Most of it I lifted from one of the late great thinkers of all time, Stuart Hall, who wrote about the global malallocation of symbolic and material resources. But I added conceptual in there just to remind us that knowing or being aware of the symbolic and knowing and being aware of the material isn't getting us anywhere if we don't have conceptual tools that let us figure out what to do. Right? Then we use the symbolic, and we're used by the symbolic, and we, attack the material in order to gather it. But conceptual is very, very important there. And by adding conceptual, I'm not correcting Stuart, but rather thinking with him. And, we're reminded over and over again by everybody who has helped us get to where we're at, get to how we can think best. We're always reminded that we need to think better, as Cabral put it, to be ready. Right? And it doesn't mean that thinking better comes before, but it has to be a persistent part of during. So, more concretely, I think a way of understanding the current global mess is to think of it in terms of the upheavals and fracturing of imperial formations and the rise of possibly new ones. But definitely the economic territory of the earth, which Lenin wrote about more than 100 years ago, is experiencing, again, repartition. This is happening over and over again. And partition occurs not only between territories that become polities or states or regions and so forth, but also partition happens between us in all aspects of social reality, including in the household, in the community, between our ability to take care of ourselves and what resources are available, between how we can talk to each other and the kinds of conversations we need to have, and so forth. The partition has symbolic and conceptual and material aspects and consequences. So there are many contradictions, which Barbara reminded me of when we were chatting on Monday getting ready for today. There are many contradictions, including and especially within that vast thing we call the capitalist class. It's really contradictory, it's deeply riven, there are messes, and this is why we see so many of the struggles unfolding before us, whether it's struggles over land grabbing, whether it's struggle over what people do with their time grabbing, and whether it's struggles over whether or not people can be alive, which is life grabbing. We see it everywhere. And these contradictions are throwing up, all kinds of dramatic political formations, not new to the world, but deeply refreshed now. So we call some of it fascism, and we call some of it socialism, and we call some of it communism, and we call most of it still the ebb and flow of what we've come to call neoliberalism. But all of these contradictions also remind us, conceptually, to think about what's happening from the ground up. And that people around the planet, and we'll talk about this more as the evening goes on, people around the planet in all kinds of configurations, in the face of many different kinds of challenges, are being historical protagonists, which is to say they are not only the victims of history. And that's what matters to me more than anything. So this is the mess we're in today, and fascism is hailing people to be particular kinds of protagonists. And the amazing organizing that many of you in this room do here in Chicago and beyond are hailing people to be particular kinds of historical protagonists. And when I say that, I am not saying that people were not acting until somebody said some magical words, although every so often that happens. Dana sort of suggested something happened when she read Golden Gulag. But rather, the remarkable combination of what people are already doing, trying to make sense of their world, to give it order and meaning, and the ways that our work, our political work, can join that and help guide, not direct, but guide it toward emancipatory purpose. There we see protagonism already in action, and the political work of figuring out how people come together to make the social reality different.
Thank you.
What do you think?
I'm funny you should ask. No, I think you give us a big picture in terms of a lot of contradictions that are in motion. And the challenge to understand the complexities of our time is kind of to wrap our heads around all those pieces of the puzzle that are in motion. I think it is actually also important to zero in on the fascist component of what we're experiencing right now. And as organizers, in order to, to be protagonists in this moment, I think it's important to remember that resorting to fascist rule is an act of weakness, not an act of strength for that sector of the ruling class. Ruling class appears to be all united and all on the same page. They are not. They're fighting each other, but they're also fighting about how to control all of us. And so when old forms of what we might call bourgeois democracy are no longer working, then elites have to take the mask off. And that is not sustainable forever, right? That in fact, every dictator goes a step too far, a mile too far, et cetera, and strengthens our movement's hand. So I think that it's not a silver lining, because people are suffering and people are dying, and there's, you talk about organized violence, and I think we're going to see more organized violence from the state and from extra state forces. But it is important to not see them as omnipotent, and to also understand that we can't organize out of fear. And so that's, we'll talk at the end about a little bit of optimism in this moment, but just to foreground this question of fascism. There's a lot of scenarios that will play out. We don't know exactly which one will play out, but coming back down to that concrete rock reality that we're dealing with, I think is important too. Let's talk about abolition.
Okay.
And you and other people in the room, Beth and Naomi in the front row and others, Alice Kim is here, Jimmy Soto, people who do work, Damon Williams do work around abolition. But I think you have, shaped a lot of how people think and talk about abolition. However, sometimes I've had some pretty funny conversations about abolition. I'm like, oh, that's what I think it means. Because the word means to abolish, the word, if you look up Merriam-Webster. But that's not just what you mean. You mean something bigger and different. And I think in this moment, particularly when we look at the nexus between fascism and the carceral state, that it is an extension of, a mirror of, et cetera, it's important to understand that layered, complex view of abolition that you share. And so I want to invite you into that defining space of what do you mean when you say abolition?
Okay.
And you're speaking to not just this group of savvy organizers, but all the people who are tuning in from their kitchen counter or
Okay,
backyard.
everybody, bear with me. All right, so.
In 5 minutes or less.
In 5 minutes or less.
You can take as long
as my time piece
You
out.
can take as long as you want.
All right, so a way I've come to think about abolition is to think it as emancipation in rehearsal. All right, abolition is emancipation in rehearsal. So then you'll say, well, what does that mean? Good question. I need to go back to the great Du Bois to give you some context for how I came to this concept. In 1935, Du Bois, who was, as you know, a Harvard-trained historian and a Humboldt-trained sociologist, went through the kind of records of the Reconstruction period, that radical period that lasted for only a few years after the conclusion of the hot part of the US Civil War. And he read and reread both all of the published texts, the standard texts, the dominant texts that people had written, and he looked at things he'd looked at before as a younger scholar, archival materials and so forth. And he saw a different story from the story that the dominant texts told. He saw a story in which emancipation was not a change of status, but rather how people were living their lives. So that's the first thing. But the second thing, which is important, is that how people were living their lives, the kinds of institutions they formed, the kinds of practices they engaged in, and so forth, were in part derived from what they had already been doing while slavery still existed, right? They were bringing practices as historical protagonists, although victims of slavery, through their everyday lives, across time, across space, and there are many historians and others who have written the most astonishing books about this. So they were pulling things through time and inventing new forms that were adequate to the task of establishing themselves as it were, self-determining polities. And Du Bois described this set of practices, quite varied across space-time, as abolition democracy, and differentiated it from industrial democracy, and I'm like that's north where Wall Street is, or east where Wall Street, I have no idea. Where are we? It is that way. Okay, I'm a geographer, but I'm not an atlas. So, a number of us, most notably Angela Davis, but others, have been really taken by the kinds of arguments and evidence and meditations that Du Bois engaged in that book. If it was published in 1935, it means he was writing it for most of the 30s, if not longer, right? And it gave me, rereading it, and I've taught it many times, rereading it gave me a way to think both my political life, well, this is more than both, all of the above. My political life, my scholarly life as a geographer, and my earlier training in drama. My niece is here, who is an actor. Right? And to think really hard about how we can think abolition in a way that enables us to perceive what people are doing in their everyday lives, in their complex or simple institutions, over immediate struggles or long-term struggles, to secure land, to secure housing, to secure jobs, to secure food, to secure bodily integrity, to secure life, to secure breathing, all of this. And that in a general way, as Du Bois showed and others show, the general impediments to people's ability to flourish and engage in what some of us call self-determination result from the twinned processes of organized abandonment and organized violence. So you mentioned organized violence. Organized abandonment also comes into the picture. So as people rebel against their own abandonment, people do a wide variety of things, as it were, in experimental form, and try to figure out how to live life differently, but to do it in such a way, and this goes back to Du Bois, to do it in such a way that there might be conceptually an audience, which is to say a possible fellow traveler or set of fellow travelers who, in encountering this activity, might change their understanding of the world and engage in it as well. So this is the moment where I go from being a Du Boisian to a Brechtian. And I will continue. So, I'm sure I'm in the 6th of 5 minutes, but I want to say one other thing.
Take your time.
And that is, for a lot of people, and a lot of people who are very quick to wag the finger and say, no, abolition is not that, it's really this other thing, there are a number of people who imagine, for good reason, that what abolition is about is ending something called the prison industrial complex. That's only part of it. Because the prison industrial complex couldn't be, the deportation industrial complex couldn't be. The various forms of exclusion, of time grabbing and life grabbing could not work without that more general problem that I've already mentioned of the twinned forces of organized abandonment and organized violence. So this is where it all sort of comes together. The condition of slavery, as many people, including most notably in recent years, the great Orasanmi Burton, reminds us, is a condition of war. Like, how can we imagine slavery without thinking of it as war? Is therefore a condition that is conditioned on the perpetual presence of organized violence. The condition of criminalization depends on the perpetual presence of organized violence as well, and the vulnerability to either being grabbed into slavery or grabbed into prison is related to the processes through which organized abandonment unroll, whether we're talking about West Africa in the 16th century or Chicago in the 21st century, right? There is a conceptual continuity with all of the differences that obviously we have to recognize and acknowledge as we try to understand what to do.
In all that, to take it back to that word abolish, and you have a book in the works called Change Everything, which will say some of what we need to get rid of. But what I hear in the complexity of this definition of abolition is we don't just have to get rid of, but we have to also be in the process of creating and recreating ourselves and the world around us, and that is a part of the dialectical relationship of, but in order to be fully human, to be self-determined, I might not use that word, but in order to be fully human, unimpeded by all that racial capitalism puts on us and shackles us with, we have to get rid of certain obstacles in our path. But in order to live in that world without those things, other things have to be present, and we have to be in the process of creating those things too. And I think for Du Bois was the first, I went to college late, and I talked my way into Eric Foner's Marxism class, and we read Du Bois, and it's a big book.
It's a big book. It's a very big book.
Black Reconstruction. And I read that book, and I had highlighted the whole thing. I mean, like my highlighters, I said, oh, well, this sentence is important too. Now the next one is really important. But that process of looking at a historical moment and kind of taking it back and understanding it from the point of view of people who had agency, who were indeed protagonists, and who were creating and destroying at the same time. Anyway, all of that to say, two things that you said that I want to come back to. One is you alluded to what's happening right here in Chicago. And so sometimes people talk about the prison industrial complex and a prison as a part of, but a central part of, what has to be destroyed. But then with immigration, we have a whole detention infrastructure that is an extension of that prison process, which has a different set of scaffolding around it, and a different set of arguments about who should be disposed of and disappeared, not just put away in a cage, but disappeared. And I won't forget when Trump talked about invading DC and getting rid of unhoused people. It was like, where are they going to go? They're going to go far, far away, or they're going to go to a country they never been to before. How important is it, and how can we best understand this accentuated, accelerated, hyper level of incarceration around particularly attack on immigrants and migrants?
Oh boy, where to begin? There are many places to begin. But let me make a comment about something else you said, and then I'll come back to this. And that this has to do with what it means to get rid of something. There seems to be a kind of law of conservation of something in the world. And so if you get rid of something, there's still the remnants of that can become, and indeed should become, something else. So if we think about abolition not as dematerializing, but rather freeing up those resources to make something else. Bricks, mortar, ideas, resources, each other, then it's, I think, a stronger way to think of what abolition is, which is what I learned from reading Du Bois, and you probably did too, right? That they made things out of things. That this is the beauty of it, and also the terror of it, is to make things out of things. All right.
Ruthie, can you hold that thought, and can I just interject an example?
Yeah, of course.
I'm just reminded of somebody who's very much on my mind. The Chicago artist Maria Gaspar and Thaddeus Tukes, who's a vibraphonist, who took bars from a demolished jail in Chicago and turned it into a vibraphone that he then makes beautiful music with, and makes beautiful music as a prelude to talking about police and prisons. So transforming the material. Yeah.
There we have it.
Yeah. And we didn't even plan that example. I just thought of it.
Everybody is dismissed. No, that's a perfect and perfectly wonderful example. But back to this continuum. I'm kind of inspired at this moment to talk about something that I've written about for some years, and a lot of us have engaged in conversations about, and that is conceptually a great impediment to our political understanding and strength is the idea that there are some innocent people. And it is so prevalent. It is so prevalent. There is, for those of us who have been fighting against the PIC in terms of people who have been, convicted and sent off to cages, there was long a movement which, we participated in it in the 90s, would say, well, this person shouldn't be, this person shouldn't be. And then finally, where people were saying, well, who should be? And it was like, we've been thinking the wrong way. Instead of thinking incrementally about how to get rid of something by figuring out who shouldn't be, we should start from who should be, and having no answer, then we say, then everything changes. Or we have to change everything, right? So that is a problem in understanding the continuum of criminalization through ICE raids in elementary schools, is getting out of our heads the notion that there are innocent people, which suggests that there are people who are not innocent, who should be put in cages, blah, 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 right? Now, here's a very simple and concrete example for those who haven't already anticipated this while listening and thinking with me. It used to be in the United States of America that if one crossed the border without documentation and one was caught, one would be sent away and then one could come back and get caught maybe and sent away. Well, that became a felony, right? Crossing the border again after having been caught and sent away. Right? It's a very simple example, but it shows that your behavior cannot change and you become a criminal anyway, which takes away, I hope, the foundation of imagining there are innocent people, right? And if we think about this together, then we can also think about the problem of innocence as one that impedes our ability to understand and to organize with people who are understanding that the disposal of humans is what this system is for. Like Angela Davis, I think at the first Critical Resistance Conference in 1998 was talking about how, you know, the quote unquote, the state disappears people into prison. So the disappearance was already, you know, present in like those early moments when we were all saying, yeah, we're abolitionists, and saying, but what do you think it means? Right? What? We believe this, but we don't know how to say it yet. We don't know how to explain it yet. We're figuring it out as we go along, which is what political work is. The continuum to detention then is the continuum of the rise of the forces of organized violence who have year in and year out in this country and in other countries been building their political heft. It's not a matter of once upon a time there was organized violence and it's kind of maintained a steady state, but somehow magically all kinds of people have gotten caught up in the system. No, no, no. The forces of organized violence are constantly building their political power. So much so that I actually heard one of the most famous civil rights lawyers of my generation, Connie Rice, say, quote, "I love the police because all the politicians are afraid of them." Right? Now, it stopped my heart that she said this, but I was also really glad she said it because it was more hearable or legible to people for famous civil rights lawyer, successful civil rights lawyer, Connie Rice, to say that than for abolition communist Ruth Gilmore to say it. But we definitely saw the same thing. But what has happened since then, that was like 2014 or something, is that the police are the politicians, right? They're not just compelling the political class to do certain things, they have become the political class. They're not the only ones, but they're part of it. So this compounding of power and authority, which is dependent on being able to get rid of people, to detain people against their will for part or all of their lives, and put them wherever, because having been detained, you have no say, you are civilly dead, then what we see is the rise and consolidation of contemporary fascism, bit by bit by bit, and how the current federal administration and many state administrations was formed depends on all of this, even though, as much as I've been talking about the forces of organized violence, I'm not turning my back for 1 second on all the rest of racial capitalism.
Right. We're coming to that.
I know.
Yeah. And we're coming to the next question is going to be about, as you know, Ruthie Gilmore, abolitionist communist, and a communist with a little c. But I also just wanted to add, you know, this question of guilt and innocence and fascism. I mean, the bar keeps changing in terms of what's guilty and what's innocent, right? When we use that word criminalization, the things that are criminal behavior now, more things are sitting in this room might be a criminal behavior, right? Saying Trump is a jerk might be a, critical behavior. In England, in London, 900 people, amazing number of people were arrested for supporting Palestine Action that had not been criminal behavior, 6 months ago. So as we see, ever encroaching fascism, that line between innocent and guilt changes because of that process of needing to exert more organized violence in order to hang on to control of racial capitalism. Now, Ruthie Gilmore, abolition is communist with a little c.
With a little c.
Yeah. So, and we'll talk about Lenin for a minute, not for too long.
Okay.
Because he's been dead a long time. But why is it important to you, and what does it mean to you, and what do you want to challenge us to think about when you say you're a communist?
Okay. All right.
Because this is also, part of what Trump keeps throwing around is like we're, it's like McCarthyism on steroids, and he doesn't even halfway know what he's talking about. But he knows a little bit. He knows a little bit.
Yeah.
So the Marxist professors, the communists, but just having that language and having other people pick up and troll with it, like it's the kind of thing you say and is unquestionably bad and evil and criminal. So why do you use that word?
Why do I use that word? It's the strangest thing to me. I was born in 1950, at a time when in the United States of America being a communist was bad and evil and criminal. And I came to consciousness thinking about how, in the absence of the great communist revolutions, the possibilities for the Black freedom movement would have been severely, severely constrained. And I suspect you agree with me about that. Like, there was no way around that. And thinking then about communism got me, as a 12-year-old, to, oh my goodness, this was my first geography textbook when I was 12. It's called Geography and World Affairs. And in it, in 1962, which was very strange, so still, the height of the Cold War. In 1962, my textbook had a section on capitalist economic development and then planned economies. And the picture on the first page of the planned economy section was this beautiful page of, I think we were supposed to understand it as Soviet wheat. It was probably Ukraine, actually. But beautiful page of wheat. And I read this section with one of my classmates, because we were assigned to make a report to the rest of the, whatever it was, the 7th grade class, about the section. And Kathy Hoadley and I read it, and we said, this makes so much sense. Why would you wait around for self-interest to determine things when you could just say, if we plan the economy this way, no one goes hungry, no one goes houseless. We use the resources in a good, this makes so much sense. And this was a standard textbook published in the United States of America. It wasn't like wild-eyed communists setting a trap for 12-year-olds. And so that's when Kathy and I declared to our class at the end of our report, and now we are communists. And half of the girls, this was the Day Prospect Hill School for Girls, which I desegregated. That's another story for another conversation. But half of the girls, had youthful coronary failure. And the other half were really curious about why we would make such a madcap declaration, given what we know about communism being evil and da 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 da. And from that moment forward, I just thought, well, this makes so much sense. I would go home and talk with my parents about it. My father was a union organizer and community organizer. My mother was an active person too. That's how we said it in the 60s. She was active. And my father never tried to talk me out of it, like ever. He wanted to know what I thought, and then I had to make my arguments. And so the more I thought, the more I believed that it should be possible to realize our general flourishing and well-being together, given the remarkable material, including technological capacities we have in the world. And they were somewhat different in the 60s than they are today. Right? So that's why communists, because capitalism, saving capitalism from capitalism, is never going to resolve the dilemmas that we're constantly fighting through.
We could, it's 7:30, but, and I know you all have questions to ask, but I have to follow up a little teeny bit. Yeah. Which is to say, you know, and I probably a disproportionate number of people here have read and thought about socialist and communist ideas and Marxism and neo-Marxism and all that. Maybe not, maybe so, maybe not. But you say communist with a little c as opposed to socialist. And so, you know, the old arc of, you know, the evolution of society would be, as we were taught, not in your class, but in other spaces, you know, is that socialism would be state-planned economies, and communism would be a classless society. So you make a distinction between socialism and communism for a reason.
It's not the reason, though, of the state.
Okay, what is it?
That is a totally other conversation.
Yeah,
but
the anti-state state, we're not going to even get to that, Ruthie, because your answers were too long.
Can we just like fast forward to that? Can we just fast forward to that?
Yeah, we can go to your next favorite question after this. But answer this one first.
All right. So, for me, and maybe for some people here, the difference between socialism and communism is not so much about is it a state-planned economy or is it a classless society exactly, but rather the difference is socialism is, to me, from each according to his ability, to each according to work performed. And communism is
the need.
That's the difference for me.
That's the main difference.
That's the main difference for me. Yep.
Okay. Well, we'll chit chat.
Discuss.
Now I have a surprise question for you.
Oh, shoot.
About the anti-state state.
Okay.
No, just kidding. There are terms that you use, and because you use them and they're not necessarily self-explanatory if they are used, you know, in common parlance. And I think you do that to provoke people to think about, like, why would she say the anti-state state? What is that? Or why would she say capitalism can't work to save capitalism? I think I know what you mean by both of those things, but why don't you tell us what you mean by the anti-state state and why it's so important right now?
Sure. All right, let me be brief.
Was that your favorite
That's
question?
my favorite question. Actually, I like all your questions. And there's 7 more questions you're not going to get to. All right, the anti-state state. The anti-state state is the state that political actors have gotten control of or retained control of. It's usually a combination. Insisting that if they get or retain control of the state, they're going to do away with it. And what they do over and over and over again is to make the state harder and bigger in particular ways, not in any old way.
Right, that's the important distinction.
That is the important distinction. So many people think that I'm anti-state because I have this concept, the anti-state state. I'm not. I'm not yet. And in my view, we see the full realization of the anti-state state that has been coming in waves and waves and waves in many polities around the United States and beyond. It has come to its full, I don't want to use a positive word like flowering fruition. It's become to its full fuck you-edness. I forgot we're online. In the current federal administration. This is the anti-state state.
Absolutely.
It is getting bigger. It is getting harder. And it's not only getting bigger and harder by the expansion of the forces of organized violence, although we all see it, and we're all preparing for it to arrive here in Chicago, and our comrades in Los Angeles have been facing off with it for a while, and in DC. But also, the anti-state state uses a number of different techniques to shrink the social welfare functions of the state in ways that don't necessarily reduce even those costs. So it's never about saving money, right? So everybody knows that if you have need of any kind of specialized social service or Medicare or, I was talking with Professor Kareem Raby today about student loan forgiveness. It is almost impossible to do the paperwork in such a way that you find out if you're eligible, much less to get the thing you need, right? That's part of the anti-state state. They haven't just like erased it at all. At all, at all. And the anti-state state has this huge following on the part of people who are convinced and convinced again and convinced again that for them, something called the government is the problem, to which this government is the solution. Like, we have all of that going on, and conceptually finding our way through that is really tricky. But that's what I mean by the anti-state state.
Yeah. And mostly, it's building up the armed, violent wing of the state.
Yes.
I mean, that's what fascism does, and that's what we're seeing happen so rapidly and expensively now.
Yes.
Yeah. And the abandonment is the expulsion of surplus workers that they don't need. So on that grim note, and the last question I will ask her, or one of you can ask her, is what do we feel optimistic about in this moment? Not to be Pollyanna-ish, but there are things to be optimistic about, and a lot of organizing that's going on, and the importance of that. So I'm going to open it up to you all asking a few questions, and we'll take a few at a time, and then see what Dr. Gilmore has to say, and then we will see if there's time for 3 more, and then we'll see what Dr. Gilmore has to say, and then we'll look at the clock.
All right.
We're supposed to be out of here at 8 o'clock.
And let me remind you that a question is a short statement that ends with a raised voice.
And we can see the question mark floating in the air, not the period. Anyone? And you can also just ask, what did you mean by that?
Yeah.
What is, yes.
Yeah.
Whenever I talk about abolitionism and I talk about the need to get rid of cages, most people will ask me, what are we supposed to do with the murderers and the people who do sexual violence and rapists? How do you handle that question? Because it just comes up so often, and I have a hard time just even responding to it. Because what you discussed is amazing, but those people who are thinking about practical realities, what they call practical realities, as though the police does anything about those things, right? they're concerned about the people they still think need to be in cages, those people who aren't innocent, quote unquote.
That's a
Good.
good question.
She's going to take a couple of questions, and that's a good question. It's a real question. Yeah, in the back with the hat.
Thank you both so much. I think the question is hopefully specific enough. So this framework that you laid out of the problem of innocence, or this idea that no one is innocent, very powerful concept, and I wonder how you sort of bring that to bear on issues around where childhood is mobilized as a framework. So I was particularly thinking about like trans healthcare bans, but also DACA and like issues where the child's innocence is attached to the parent's innocence.
Okay, Mas. All you smart people in here have questions? No? Did we scare you with putting stipulations on the questions?
This is kind of the flip side of the what do we do with the murderers and sexual violence question. I think so many people credit you about abolition being about this new presence. You talk about creating new things. And I think people all over are experimenting. I, as someone for 11 years, have been saying this. You sometimes feel discouraged in how we struggle to operationalize that language of "we keep us safe." And so I think conceptually, politically, we know what we mean, but not to be promotional, but in like the framework of experimenting. Are there experiments in this wellness and protection or creation of new ideas of safety that make abolition practice feel more possible?
S3. Want to roll with those?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ruthie, would you mind just repeating the question?
Okay.
To them through the stream?
All right. So the first question is, what do you do about the murderers, rapists, and child molesters?
How you answer that question? You said.
How do I answer
How does
that
he-
question? I'm sorry.
In other words, he wasn't saying that himself.
No, I was not being challenged. I was being fought with in a very engaging way. The second is, the problem of innocence and how when, childhood is mobilized as the kind of objectively, if anybody's innocent, it's children, and then somehow that innocence might spread onto or leak onto their parents or something. Or certain formations like DACA. And then the third from Comrade Damon is, what are some experiments, some examples of putting into practice "we keep us safe"? See? Okay.
Go.
Answer. All right. So I'm not gonna answer the first question exactly the way I think you might have been hoping to, but I want to point something out that's so interesting politically. In the late 90s, we got asked that all the time. Am I lying, Beth? No. We got asked that all the time. Anytime we got up, we were asked that question, and the question went away. It stopped being that you knew you were going to be asked that question at any talk you gave. And it's come back. So the question is, why is the question back? Right? That it's not because there's like this sudden, rise in the behavior of said three categories. Right? Something else is going on. And it's related to the anti-state state and so forth, which doesn't persuade anybody who says, in all seriousness, what about these people? So what I used to do years ago was to say, all right, let's say, I don't agree, but let's pretend we agree that a number of people should have time out for a while. I don't agree, but let's say that's such a tiny number. And that, of course, gets on the slippery slope of relative innocence. That's why I had to stop that. But it was a way, though, to get some people to start to think with me, with us, about other ways of imagining where social problems come from, why they coalesce in some ways and not other ways, and then what is to be done. And like I said, the question went away, and now it's back. So I'm very curious about why it's back, and I don't have an answer about that, except for the obvious one, which is to say that the forces of organized violence are in our faces all the time, reminding us all the time that we are in danger all the time. So it could just be from CNN or Fox News or social media or something like that, that this is all that people can think about. So that's what I think. The child's innocence, oh man, I had a debate many years ago with somebody, a young woman, comrade who was promoting trying to get people to support DACA, and it was at a socialism conference, not one of these, a different socialism conference. And this was some years ago. And I had given a talk first and had laid out this problem of innocence, and she got up there and said, but I am innocent. And then we had to debate it, right? Because it's like, you're not actually, but it's all right, because none of us are. You know? It makes your crowd bigger, not smaller, to give that up. And then we keep us safe. Again, I'm going to turn the question a little bit away from, I think, what you might have in mind, Damon, other than to say there are all kinds of amazing resources everywhere that everybody should know about. There are, million experiments that the great Mariame Kaba, I can't believe I've been in Chicago and have not said her name out loud until now, I just said it. Mariame Kaba and comrades, put into motion. There's interrupting criminalization that Mariame Kaba and Andrea Ritchie and other people put into motion. There's survived and punished that Mariame Kaba and other people have put into motion, and so forth. But there's so many. There's Insight Women of Color Against Violence that Beth Ritchie and many other people got going 25 years ago, and so forth. There's many practical programs, because abolition is a practical program. That is what it is. Like what I was talking about from Du Bois's book, that was all practical. They weren't like a bunch of, sitting in a cafe spinning ideas, but they were spinning ideas practically. So, but here's where I'd like to leave everybody with, and these are sources of great optimism for me. One, many people in many parts of the world, including here in the city of Chicago, have trouble maintaining shelter, getting it and maintaining it. So the unhoused people threatened with being disappeared in DC are also here in Chicago and elsewhere. This is true all over the world. And in a planet of 8 billion people, where for the first time in history, more than half of the planet's humans live in urban environments. It's never happened before in the history of humanity. There are many people who are struggling to have a home, right? Freedom is a place, and I believe that with all my heart and soul. So, some of the comrades out in the world who have become the most enthusiastic practitioners, and I will say, in a way, proselytizers of abolition, are people who started their political journey figuring out how to have a place to live. And figuring out that they couldn't do that individually or even as households, but had to do it collectively as communities. And because the only way to do it would be to occupy land or buildings, the forces of organized violence showed up all the time to evict them, to destroy their stuff, and to hurt them. Right? It took years of conversations with comrades in South Africa for whom, understandably, The vulnerabilities of everyday life were so profound that the idea that anybody, least of all some professor from New York, would say police are the problem, not the solution, was just unhearable. But we persisted and talked, and over time, a movement of movements of unhoused people, or shack dwellers, quote unquote, in South Africa, Abashali, has become extremely interested in and in solidarity with the principles of abolition, because they see how that relates to their ability to live where they live. That's one example. Another example are many comrades in Brazil. Similar stories. There are big organizations like MST, there are tiny organizations like Quilombos, same kind of thing. And in Brazil, interestingly enough, some of the people who have been thinking about this in recent years have generalized from the police to capitalism instantly, right? Instantly. So, you know, those struggles, which are really practical on the ground, are examples of how people work really hard collectively to keep us safe. And it's not about having like community policing.
Damon worked on that project with Mariam too, who asked you the question. He's one of those.
You said experiments, so I knew where you were going with that.
Comrades.
I'm sorry, and I should say, and the great Damon Williams.
Just because the mask might matter. But I do want to say a little something about We Keep Us Safe too. I think We Keep Us Safe because it does trouble me sometimes. And it reminds me of when we say, when we fight, we win. When we fight, we don't always win. But when we fight, we move the needle on freedom. So I think we have to equivocate and qualify. And in terms of We Keep Us Safe, we don't always keep us safe because there's a lot of harm going on. And if I could keep all, you know, the beautiful brown children in my neighborhood safe, I would. I can't. But we know how to keep us safe if given the opportunity, safe as possible. And so I know that doesn't sound like a great slogan, but or a chant. But I do think it requires some humility as we go into communities where there is enormous violence that if we could stop it, we would. And the best way to stop it is obviously not through prisons and police, but it's through preventing it from happening, which is a whole other set of issues that you're talking about in terms of changing everything. And that's, I think, what I hold when I think of that, you know, that term, We Keep Us Safe, was we know how to keep ourselves safe and our people safe if given the resources and the opportunity. And that is by interrupting the process by which harm begins to occur. People don't have what they need, you know, including health care and mental health care. People don't have de-escalation techniques. People don't have food and housing and so forth. Anyway, I just want to add that.
I'm so glad you did.
Are there any other lingering questions out there? Because we do have a few more minutes. We don't get kicked out until later. Naomi, raising her hand like she's shy. Dr. Naomi Pike.
And nobody gets kicked out anyway.
I'm going to call everybody in here doctor if you keep doing that, Dana. Doctor.
Thank you so much for all of this, as always. It kind of bounces off your question, Damon, and then also the first question. So I want to think about time and scale. So how do you respond to, like, things are, it feels like we're going down a luge, like how fast things are moving.
Yes.
And so there is so much in motion, and there is so much, like, just seeing what regular, ordinary people are doing that gives me a lot, it keeps me going. And also the scale and the speed of the crisis right now is so overwhelming, and it requires for me just for me, is so much compartmentalization. And just trying to, I just have to focus on one thing at a time, knowing that the scale and the speed of the crisis are so far outpacing us, even though so many people are working so hard at it. So I'm wondering, like, with the climate crisis, with AI, with like, and then this like the extraordinary speed of our decline into fascism, like, yeah, I don't know how to formulate the question, but like, how do you respond to that? Like, what do we do? I was kind of sheepish about it because I'm not even sure what the form of the question is, but it's something about how do we grapple with the speed and the scale of this crisis. It is everywhere, it's coming from all directions, and there's so many people working on all the different angles of it, and it still seems insufficient. I know it's not, but like it kind of feels that way. So how do we grapple with that?
Raise your voice. No, it's a question. Well, if someone would bring my soapbox, I'll get on it. Yeah, other questions?
But that is a real, I mean,
it's a
and
great
I feel it
question.
in your voice, and
Yes.
that's what wakes me up at 4 in the morning. You know,
Yeah.
I feel like I'm moving 100 miles an hour, sometimes in multiple directions, and am I doing enough? And it doesn't seem to be stopping the
I
train.
feel like I'm going backwards.
Well, but remember moving the needle. I think as long as we're moving the needle, and I think the goal is to stop, to win, to neutralize. So some people will be neutralized, some people will be won over, and some people will be defeated. So, you know, those three things are happening at the same time too. I think, you know, that Audre Lorde quote about the master's tools, you know, the other thing she said there, you know, she said the master's tools won't dismantle a master's house. You know the rest of the quote? You're nodding. No, the rest of the quote is, but sometimes it can help to beat him at his own game. So I think we also can't be purists about strategies and tactics. I think we have to do a lot of different things. I'm not a big electoral person, but I do think stopping this fascist train, the midterms are important. The Democrats have demonstrated their moral bankruptcy beyond what one could even imagine. However, giving Trump back a majority in 2 years is going to speed up the train even more. And I think we have to view it in those terms. It's not about liberation, it's about, you know, a maneuver. So I think speaking up, I think being in the streets as long as we can be in the streets, having a plan B, some of which may be creatively quiet, all those things. And also, you know, claim your people. I mean, there's so many more people. The thing that has been an inadvertent gift to us is that there's so many people who wanted to be apolitical who have been politicized by this just because they've been attacked like out of nowhere. You know, the scientists, right? The people in my building who never talk politics and like, oh yes, read something you wrote again, you know, like, you know, want to talk about what are we going to do? So now you know we have the ear of people. We have potential allies and co-conspirators and comrades that we didn't have before. And so I think thinking of every opportunity to do that, and I think it's a long haul. You know, I mean, I don't know if we all know, but I mean, I know people who've survived dictatorships in Latin America. Some of them had to leave the country, some of them endured great hardship, you know. But on the other side of that, they built relationships, they built movements, they got steeled in struggle. And so I think we're in for a hard period, and I think it's dishonest to say that that is not the case. But can we fight and come out stronger? And I think we have to believe that we can, and we have to fight like hell to make that true. And it's not a guarantee.
May I add something?
Yes, you may.
Please. Thank you, Dr. Ransby.
I'm sorry.
And thank you, Dr. Pei.
I'm sorry. I scolded her for giving long answers.
No,
and then
I'm so like,
went on.
Right, I feel so much better about myself. No, because what you were just discussing in response to fantastic, and it was a question. I was just teasing you. It was totally a question and a crucial one. Reminds me of part of the discussion we had getting ready for tonight, and that is the problem and challenges and urgency of understanding, which is to say conceptualizing Popular Front movement and United Front movement, not confusing them or trying to collapse one into the other, and having kind of different political sensibilities about the kinds of work that go into getting a Popular Front going for a while, like the people in your building, whoever, as well as building a United Front that will be around for a longer haul. And I just want to throw in here, for whatever good it might do, that in the United States of America, for example, slavery lasted a really long time. It lasted even longer in Brazil, right? So talk about long haul. There's long haul, but many, many, many other long hauls long preceded us and inspire us. As we think about building united fronts, it strikes me that one of the key things we should do is figure out how to get people who are already organized together with other people who are already organized, right? So if we had time, I would talk about National Nurses United, which is kind of one of my favorite examples because they do so many things. Though they are a trade union. They're not a political party, they are a trade union. But what a trade union. And we could talk about, certain faith communities. We can talk about big organizations and small organizations. But figuring out how to get people who are already organized to understand not just that they should be allies, but rather that they share a purpose. And the purpose has to do with realizing what organization A was established to do and what organization B was established to do, because there are always complexities beneath the surface of we exist to be a trade union, we exist to create housing, we exist to make sure kids can walk to school and home without getting hurt, etc.
Mm-hmm. And the good news is that a lot of that is happening. Mm-hmm. And the thing that still probably worries me and Naomi is that, we bring all the limitations and contradictions of our, of left movements before we were in, looming fascism, mm-hmm. To this moment. And mm-hmm. so, but we just got to deal with it. Mm-hmm. We got to deal with it mm-hmm. and step into the moment. Mm-hmm. So, mm-hmm. on that note, we got work to do, but you know what? We're in it together. Yeah. All right, we're in it together. All right, well, thank you, Ruthie Gilmore.
Thank you, Barbara Ransby.